What is it that got you interested in tech itself?
I have dabbled with different areas of work, starting with
What are the key challenges in the process of doing this?
it just shows up when you're working with legacy systems.
How do you find maintaining calm whilst having those issues occur?
Security is so baked into how you set up the servers, right?
What do you think has helped you grow the most from that?
There are multiple things that are coming to my mind right now.
Have you found there have been any cybersecurity challenges you've seen?
It's just a matter of getting into their database and then being able to get everything.
Hi everyone and welcome to Tech Unfiltered, the podcast. I am excited to have my guest here, Shivani, join us. She is a software engineer at Microsoft and she is a security and a cryptography expert. Shivani, do you want to tell us more about your experience and your background?
Sure. Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Shivani. I am a software engineer at Microsoft, currently working in security, basically making sure that, all the systems that come up are keeping their secrets. So it has to do more with, how the security keys between services are shared. So that's what I work with right now. I have close to 5 years of experience in the industry, and I worked with mainly tech giants, starting with Adobe, and then I moved to Amazon, and now finally here at Microsoft.
So, can you tell me a little bit more about your journey into tech? What is it that got you interested in tech itself?
So, I would have to go back to high school. I'd say we in India, at least, we have to make this daunting choice of what line of career we are going to go with. It's mainly like commerce, arts, or science. I knew that I would want to be in science because I've always been a nerd that way. So I was very sure that it's going to be science, but I did not want to go into becoming a doctor. Not that I did not like biology, but not something that was for me. So I went with computer science at that time, but I just started to love, it was called C++. Computer science was we were taught C++ mainly. And by the end of my high school, I had to do this project. Everybody had to do a project. And I made this snake game. So, the old Nokia phones that you used to have, that snake game. So it was just no graphics, nothing. It was just a continuous loop printing out the snake. And I did whole mazes, high score, everything. And that was fun. And I just I said, well, I've been creative. So being able to create something from scratch and doing it with software kind of found, my niche. And that's when I decided that I would pursue a career in software in computer science. So yeah, that's how I got into it.
Awesome. So how did then you decide you got into computer science? What made you then get interested in the security aspects of computer science? Because computer science is massive if you think about it, and then security is a very specific element of it as well.
Yeah. So during the 5 years of my career, it's been very varied. I started as a product intern, as an experienced developer intern with Adobe. It was completely different from even your normal, even front end software engineering for that matter, because it is more like POCs. So I have dabbled with different different areas of work, starting with experience development. It was UX heavy. It was about, how to make the user have a good experience using the products, and then moved to a full-time role, which was again more on the full stack role with Adobe Fresco. It is kind of like Photoshop, but it's on iPad and other platforms as well. It's on touchscreen Windows and iPhone as well. So that was a very different tech stack from my internship role. And then I moved to backend with Amazon, which was then dealing with distributed services. And I guess while I was choosing this role here in Microsoft, I was sure that I wanted to get more into the backend side of things because I had done business logic and front end heavy kind of work earlier. Not that I did not like it, I absolutely loved that as well. But I wanted to get into a side of things that explore more of how, distributed services work and scale. And it just so happened that I came across this opening, and it was for OneDrive SharePoint, which is the current team that I work with. And yeah, I mean, it was unique in the way that I hadn't already explored that area. So I just kind of wanted to, understand what it would take to make sure that such a big and, huge service is secure. So I think that was kind of what motivated me to get into this.
Yeah, I have quite interest in the security side as well, and I just think it's quite a fun thing to do to like figure out how to make things secure, especially with things like AI coming out and data coming out, where really they're quite new and there's a lot of ways to trick the system to give information that it shouldn't do. So I think being able to lock down a system is a really interesting and difficult problem to solve, like you always have to solve, I think.
Yeah, totally agree on that point. And, as you said, like with AI, I think security is one area which is not going anywhere. I mean, it's not going to become obsolete. If anything, it would be more important as we go forward. So, yeah.
So one of the things that we spoke about before in our brief conversation before this podcast was you have started taking more of an interest in the AI and data side as well, but not necessarily as part of your role. What does that like typically entail?
So basically, I've like always wanted to get into ML and AI space. So even during my college years, I did, projects in ML. I had like my major project in junior year about comparative analysis of image recognition models. So I wanted to get into it, but did not quite get a chance through my work at that time. And I would just get into learning and then get away, get into learning and get away. So it was kind of, yo-yoing back into it and going away. But then in 2024, I said that I would finally just step into it, and I started creating content on it on LinkedIn as a way to, get some accountability. So yeah, I started with deep learning, got into courses from Andrew Ng. He's the OG in the space. So yeah, just got into it and kept doing it, kept building projects in the area, kept sharing more and more. And then, there was a lot. I just also wanted to understand, how to best use Gen AI and LLMs they are in a lot of ways disrupting the way that we used to work. And, since I think of it like, Google changed the way that we kind of searched. And I don't know. I mean, I'm just as old as Google, so I don't know what was way before that. But now I think the way that we work, even interact with internet or any sort of new thing that I go to, I just get on with LLMs. So I also wanted to understand how best we can use it. And it's so important to know the foundation and the fundamentals to build an intuition, to be able to know what LLMs or whatever the new tech is capable of, and to be able to actually use it in a way that it should be, and also understand the limitations. So yeah, that's what made me get into AI.
One of the things that I find challenging in my role is I do a lot of research and development, and so like LLMs are great for like talking things through for me, but I find it very difficult to provide any sort of coding examples or anything like that because it just doesn't have the data there to actually create anything that's actually useful to me. Do you find that as well?
I mean, it's sure is. I always have this beef that it's not that personalized. It's always going to be that way. You do have to. LLMs are just generative through and through. So whatever they know, they just repeat. So you have to ground it in reality. So I agree with you that that does happen when it does not have complete context. And that's why I guess prompt engineering is so in, and everybody is so, after about it. If like one way, just a starting point is to have good prompts and just being very precise with what you want from the LLM. It would just not know where to go. I mean, expecting it to magically, if we say that I want an app, just build the front end for this, you will not get the kind of results that you're hoping for. You just have to say what kind of app you want, what code, what language you're looking for, what kind of tech stack are you comfortable in. Then you have to explain what kind of user flow are you expecting, like how you would ask a 5-year-old to do something. I think you should ask that way to an LLM to do anything. And then again, if it doesn't have the complete data, so if your setup is not, optimized that way, now we have Cursor, so it has all of your code, so it does much better. But otherwise, if you're just, doing one-off prompts, you cannot expect a lot of accuracy in terms of coding. So it's just, I like to use it as a functionality. I just ask it how I would kind of build one function and then take some of it back to my own code and then tweak it, how I would do it. So I'd say it doesn't quite replace software engineering at all, as much as anybody would want to say that. But yeah, it's a tool. It enhances productivity. Like I would go to Stack Overflow and take hours. It's doing that in a lot less time.
Yeah. For me, it was more like they're like, okay, like I need to integrate with something in Azure. Okay, it's just hallucinating this random thing that doesn't actually exist, which is the common thing that I see a lot.
Yeah. Even right now on that point, I am kind of at my work also have been asked to give a workshop on RAG. So I have worked with a lot of different, tech stack, if you will, for RAG as well, but not particularly with Azure. So I'm just getting to that. And I asked ChatGPT to, kind of walk me through, and all the information was dated. So it was giving APIs which does not exist anymore. So yeah, that's a problem. You do have to hold ChatGPT by the ear a lot to get you what you want. So yeah.
Yeah, you can't just take it as face value, can you? So one of the things you mentioned was you've been transitioning systems from legacy to modern platforms. What are the key challenges in the process of doing this, have you found?
Yeah, I mean, any challenge that you can imagine and every challenge that you can imagine, it just shows up when you're working with legacy systems. So right now, the kind of systems that we have, we can't just change a lot of the way that it is built, because, that's the challenge when you have a lot of active customers that just can't move away from your service, and it would be too expensive to kind of whip up a new service. So you are stuck with this mammoth of a system which is getting dated and was built in a way which isn't very modern tech stack friendly, I'd say, for the lack of a better word. But yeah, legacy systems are stuck in their way a lot. So the most challenging thing, because we have to move the dated security practices to modern practices, that's our whole job, right? Because security is one field that changes very fast, and people break your best cryptographic systems that you earlier thought were the safest, and that changes very quickly. So we do have to move it to a new way of securing certificates and securing that the way that all the secrets are exchanged between services and between systems, for that matter, and you cannot change anything about the existing system. So the challenge there becomes is it's like changing the engine of an airplane while it's flying. You just have to make sure that you're building new pathways in a way that doesn't disrupt the old code pathways. And at the same time, you do have to ensure that all your existing customers are moving to the new ones. So one challenge that we faced was, when we started to move our secrets to a new way of storing them and then retrieving those secrets. What happened was initially we tried to just switch a flag in a user's secrets in the way that they get their certificates. So it was a change in their template. It was not backward compatible, and that broke a lot of things because the new and modern security practices required a lot of updates. So it required like your .NET version to be updated, the dependent DLLs to be updated, and not to be using any obsolete APIs, because some of the APIs that they are using internally are not backward compatible with this new cryptographic technique. So it was a lot. And the way that the system is built, you cannot know like hundreds and hundreds and even thousands of code files might have interdependent, a lot of dependencies that are baked into it, and you cannot know the extent of to where do you have to make that change or upgrade the DLLs, just get new .NET versions. So that was a pain. And we quickly realized that that will not scale for the system where we are dealing with hundreds of such secrets. So we had to come up with a way which ensured that the legacy system stays that the way that it is. We're introducing a new way, and we're asking the customers to onboard it while they have the old system as well. So they have a way to go back and a way to move forward to it, and then also ensuring that they do it in time, because ultimately, we want everybody to move to the newer way of security. Yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does. And so, like, what techniques, like, what happens then? How do you decide that you're no longer supporting a previous version? Like, what's the kind of decision factors there?
Yeah, so basically the entire, feature that the team was working on was to port. So there's one way of storing certificates called through the cryptographic API. That was the legacy way of doing things. It's called CAPI in short. But the new way of doing things requires you to use cryptographic next generation, called CNG for short. So basically what happens is CNG does not have any support prior to .NET version 4.6 or any version before that. And if any API is calling, your secret source, the private keys of the certificate through that .NET version, through the obsolete API, you would just not get the certificate when you have moved to the newer version of newer way of storing the secrets. So we clearly knew that we had to make that change. So that was pretty clear that we won't be able to support anything before 4.6 or any version before that, or any API that is using or depending upon, that version. So it had to be ported forward. And that was where the line was drawn. You just have to make that change. You cannot depend on anything that will not support that.
So do you just kind of say, we're no longer making updates to this previous version?
Not so much as updating that. We were kind of using that old legacy way, but what we did was ask the customers to kind of, or rather tell them that this is a new way that we are going to be supporting of, the way that we deal with secrets and certificates. And you will have to hop onto that to make sure that you are in compliance with our service. And so we did provide them a way to make sure they had time and, a way to move forward to the newer way of doing things while making sure that nothing is breaking for their existing use case. But they did have a hard deadline that you have to make this change by this particular date. So they had like tickets which they had to resolve by a certain deadline.
I feel like you need to as well, like with companies, you just need to give them a deadline with stuff like this, because if you don't, they just won't do it.
Yeah, that totally is. And that was also kind of supported by, not just the team, but also there's a huge demand in security as well, right? So this was driven from the top of the hierarchy in the organization as well. So it was not just us putting that timeline, more like, entire organization wanting to put that timeline on everybody. So they had to do it. Otherwise, they would have to explain why they couldn't do it, and not just to us, but, up the hierarchy. So, yeah.
So, like, I can imagine it must be quite stressful having things go wrong, security incidents or cyber attacks. How do you find, like, maintaining calm whilst having those issues occur?
I mean, this is one of the areas where everything breaks, every possible thing that you can think. I mean, even one of the recent changes, we had kind of hook it up in a phased rollout flighting way. But because it was such an important area, it gets called so many times when the service is coming up, because it is security is so baked into how you set up the servers, right? So that is the area where a lot of changes go in. So because it was so ingrained with when the service is coming up, it would make a lot of calls in a very short period of time. And so even though the change did not break, it put a lot of load on the phased rollout system, the fighting system, if you will. And that broke. And you could not have imagined, because we are keeping our, feature behind saves and, circuit breaks or kill switches or flights. And if that system does not take the load? What do you do? Because think of it like that. Your feature flag is not working. The check that checks whether or not your feature should be active or not, that system failed. So what do you do from where do you go from there? So I guess everything that can break breaks there. And the only way for us to make sure that happens very less is, again, we make sure that it is backward compatible. We make sure that we're making the changes well, within the time limit where we have the most amount of time to test it in dog food environments. And this area is not somewhere where you have a lot of, pre-dog food environment testing. So it goes there and it does what it does. And it may still not break in dog food and break everything in production. So even that has happened. It is tricky. The only thing that we can do is just stay on our toes and make sure that we have quick reverts ready to go. And we just always make sure that we are communicating to everybody that this is something that is going in and it is going to be a critical code area, and every OC should do this, in case you figure this out, in case some issue comes. Yeah. So that's just the way we deal with it.
So one of the things that you mentioned was pre-dog food. Can you talk a little bit more about what that means?
Yeah, so
I think I had that right?
Yeah. So, I mean, normally, ideally, what you would want is to have a test environment and one which is like separate from before you kind of push your change to the development, kind of merge the change to master. So, before you're doing that, you would want a system where you can test all of your changes, right? But some things just cannot be tested that way. With at least that's what I've found out with legacy systems, because you have like a lot of constraints in the way that the servers are coming up, and just not able to kind of create a sandbox which can simulate all of what a real server would have. So then what's left is for you to do some sort of sanity test that, okay, the service is not going to absolutely break, but then a lot of what you find out would or wouldn't work is only after you merge the change, which is very counterintuitive. It shouldn't be that way, but because it is such a critical code path, it is at the time of servers coming up, not a lot of it can be simulated before it actually lands in dog food environments, at least.
Okay, yes, just because I've personally not heard of that term before, so like it's just an interesting term that I've found out today. So that's pretty cool. So do you then have, like, with it being quite critical systems, and if something goes wrong, you need to have like a rollback policy in place? Do you have to go on call then?
Yeah, we have on calls, and I find myself being on call even when I don't have a shift, because a lot of what I make changes to, as I mentioned, has potential of breaking, and it's nothing less than a sev 2. It breaks everything. So yeah, plenty of times I had to come to fire hazard management. And also do have on-call shifts as well. So we do get a lot of ICMs and the works.
So you must have quite a good like rollback strategy as part of that then, if you manage to maintain that calm under pressure. Is it just a case of something goes wrong, okay, we'll roll back for now?
Yeah, some places it might be easy, as I mentioned, before the change rolls out to pre-production and production environments. Before that happens, so when, as I mentioned, it's in dog food, the rollback is pretty okay. It's safe to make. But when that change has rolled out forwards, it can be tricky, because the change is rolling out in phases, that it's getting hit to servers in phases, and you don't know where it is in the process in that chain, because it might take, like, at least depending upon the service, it might take 4 to 6 weeks, right, to hit all the servers. So there's a whole strategy. Yes, you would have to stop that change from rolling out where it is. Then you have to roll out a change where you've reversed that change. So you would have to push that release out, and then you do your forward fix and then roll out whatever the fix was supposed to be. But it is kind of stressful depending upon the impact.
Yeah, I can see that. I can imagine. Like, so in terms of the challenges that you've had at working in security, what do you think has helped you grow the most from that?
Yeah, I think there are multiple areas, multiple things that are coming to my mind right now. One would, of course, be, thinking about making systems more secure, the systems that are working at the scale that, our system is. Because then again, there are countless amount of servers and countless amount of regions. And at one point, we counted it to be upwards of 2 to 3 thousands of systems, right? So so most of what we have to do is make sure that each and every system is secure. So that's where our work is. It's not just about, one aspect of the software being secure, but every single server that is coming up and serving traffic in the system has to have that security baked in when it comes up. So, thinking from that aspect, there are a lot of challenges because depends on so many things, what version of the operating system that the system has, because that may or may not support what we're trying to bake in. We've even seen things like a new version of the OS breaking the kind of security we wanted it to have and not work in that way. So there's a lot of intermingling that's going on with the OS itself, because cryptography is, or the way that we are trying to secure the secrets or the certificates, it has to be baked into the kernel of each and every system. So it's very close to the OS, and a lot can go wrong over there. So yeah, working with the OS, I think, is one thing that I've learned. And one of the most challenging things as well is, there's a lot of abstraction, right? So there's only so much in you can go into the OS level. And then you are using a lot of, there's a library called the encrypt library, which is part of the Windows OS itself. So every change that comes to that library is baked in with the OS, and the OS version updates, the library version updates as well. So you don't have a lot of access to that code, right? You can't debug it in the way that you would want to, or see where it's failing. So if you're working with those APIs, you'll get very cryptic, no pun intended, very cryptic messages as well from that API that, if it has, for one example, there was this method called import key, encrypt import key. So it takes about 6 to 7 arguments, and it's very low level. So it has to be on the memory. It works with how C++ would, buffer sizes, pointers, all of that. So it has to be right. And if any of those 7 arguments, which to form all of these arguments, you'll also need like 10 different other things correct. And then you get these buffers, right? And if anything with these buffers go wrong, the only error that you will see from that library is that invalid parameter. Now you go figure out which one. So, all of that I think would be the most challenging part, and you don't get a lot of information about that on the internet either. So yeah.
So you find the technical challenges the hardest rather than the customer management and the stakeholder management side. Have you ever had any challenges in those areas as well?
Yeah, I mean, that does arise, but yeah, I would rate this harder still. And I think that is a problem as well, but not so much as working with the domain knowledge. You ultimately get, if you have a reasonable explanation, more or less, you would be able to communicate well to the stakeholders and customers as well to some aspect. And then it just boils down to, good engineering practices, being able to, as I mentioned, have a, two-way door strategy and being able to just come back from the decisions you've made. But more than that, it's being able to figure out how to bake all of these components in for your system, for your services, because there's not a lot of overlap. There's not a lot of information that will cater to your particular use case out there available on the internet. So it's very domain specific.
You're solving things that really haven't been done before, and it sounds quite, you're having to figure it out as you go, it seems.
Yeah, and to add on to that, was some of the features that we're building are still in beta. So even if one thing is about, not there being a lot of implementations on how to use say a cryptographic library that I mentioned. But the other thing, the other layer is that not any of it being out in the public even. So how do you deal with that? Because one of the features that we just implemented of late isn't even ever fully done before. And the team that's working on that feature on the Azure side said that we were among the first to do it end to end too. So yeah, that just to kind of add to your point that a lot of it is completely being done here. So yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. And so, like, one of the things you mentioned was like how you found AI and data interesting. Have you found there have been any cybersecurity challenges you've seen that impact those?
So did not have to work a lot. In our work, we don't have to bring in a lot of AI right now, at least. But the converse, I would be able to, talk about, because AI models, why did every single organization just asked everybody to stop using LLMs for work was because it would get your proprietary data and then they do training on it, even though that might not show up in the model. I mean, the chances of it happening right now at least is low. I don't know how that was the case 2 years ago when the LLMs just came out, or 3 years ago for that matter. But right now it's not so much a case that you would see any proprietary information just thrown out at everyone else, but that might still happen, right? So if you are sharing your numbers, let's say credit card numbers or anything, with chat gpt, that's just something you shouldn't do. Or API keys, there was something very recently even about DeepSeek, right? So with DeepSeek, one of the companies found out that all of their proprietary data was kind of available without a lot of encryption. It was just kept in their DBs without any encryption. So it's just a matter of getting into their database and then being able to get everything. So I think with AI and LLMs coming into the space, it's more important to make sure that you are, keeping in mind everything about security. So you have that role-based access controls, you have authorization, you make sure what kind of information should be available at what level, and then also encrypting it with cutting edge cryptographic techniques. So that becomes more and more important.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest like challenge that I've seen over the last year or so of companies just going crazy over implementing AI. They're just moving so fast. They think
Yeah.
they forget to think, okay, am I actually doing this in a way that's secure? They're just giving their data away for like free, and they're just like taking my data without thinking, actually, what's the implication of doing this?
Yeah, and that's why I think there's such, like there's so much kind of restriction also from the big companies, because they do understand how security works. And then also everybody just wants to get their hands on, or the ability to kind of have these big models in their own, space, in their own confines of their own systems. So I think that's where open source models are shining as well. Have to, make sure what boundaries your data is crossing. And if you're just not, keeping that in mind, I think you're losing more than you're gaining from AI in that aspect, because the fundamentals should be thought of first before you can use any kind of tech. And I think data and then security are very central to any system. And that's how you should, plan any of your systems, no matter what kind of hype is being created. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you gave a few examples of how people can and organizations can improve their security practices for AI specifically, but is there any just in general that you would suggest as well?
Yeah, of course. I mean, first might seem like a rookie mistake, but people do miss encrypt the data. Don't store it just like that in your DBs. And even, I heard even at a big organization from someone that they made a mistake of logging their secrets in the logs without it being hidden. So that made into the logs, and that those logs are, a lot less secure in in the way that they are distributed amongst at least the engineers, and that might also cross the boundaries of your teams, right? So if the users who are accessing your services and those secrets get logged in your logs, that's just poor security. So, all of that has to be taken into account when dealing or, building any kind of systems. You might be thinking from a, very engineering point of view that you want this sort of logs to, end up in your tables so that you are able to just debug it better. It might be that, oh, I want to see, what secret was fetched, or, what couldn't what you couldn't retrieve without problems. So from an engineering point of view, you might be wanting to do that, but if you don't have security in the forefront, that would just be the whole purpose of being a part of the security system. So I'd say one is making sure what levels of data do you have, categorize that data, and then have proper standards of what you can and cannot do with each forms of those categories of data. And what is supposed to be the most confidential, the most critical, should be handled by only people who need to know and need to work with it. So again, that just then converts to having role-based access control, authorizations, and limited access to all of that. So I think that is one. And then making sure that during the service is being set up and through the entire life cycle of the service, and whenever the customer is trying to retrieve or write their data back, working with their data, you have to make sure that throughout that pipeline, there's no area where, any kind of malware or anybody with malintentions can get a hold of that data throughout the pipeline. So yeah, I think those are a few things that you have to keep in mind when working with security.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the login one is such a common thing as well that I've definitely seen at other companies that I've worked with in the past where, like, user information and stuff like that wasn't really thought about. And actually, like, this is really bad practice to like put any of this in there unless you need it for a specific reason. Like, well, you shouldn't be putting any sort of personal identifying information in there anyway. You can make requests, like you can trace requests without having to trace a specific person or specific information about that person. And so it's just things like that. And especially when you're working at like a really small company, a lot of the time they just don't think about that. And
Yeah.
I just think data, the way that companies retrieve data at the moment is just really like questionable and unethical in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. But yeah, I think you appreciate all of this more when you get into security side of things. And now all we see, the way that we're building a feature, we're only seeing that aspect. Like, how can we make sure that, at this point, oh, if is this secure? Oh, but if the, attacker gets access to this part of the system, is that secure? Even if the attacker somehow gets onto the server, how secure is our data? So you have to think in layers. So yeah, but yeah, I agree with not a lot of organizations putting a lot of thought in that aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I just wanted to jump a little bit because both of us work at Microsoft, and I just wanted to quickly ask you a question on what do you think the key traits that Microsoft in general look for people who are based where you're based? Because I'm based in the UK, you're based in India, and I think there are very like key differences that Microsoft look for, but also similarities. And I have a lot of people ask me just in general, like who are based where you're based, how do they get into Microsoft? Like, what does Microsoft look for? And so I thought it'd be a great question to ask you as someone who is based where they're based. How did you find your application process, and what do you feel like Microsoft look for in employees that where you're based?
Yeah, so I just walked through the application very quickly. I just applied through the jobs portal. I did not go the referral route, although my friend did. And I would come back to how referrals work too. a bit later. But yeah, I just applied through the portal, and then I applied to like all the applications that I found fit for my experience. So, and also my area of expertise. So then I got a call from the recruiter. We had like they just wanted to understand where I've worked. So basically, have your resume be ATS friendly, so everybody knows, how to have resumes that do get selected. So I would skip that part. But yeah, then the resume was selected. We had a call discussing my expertise, and then we went forward with scheduling interviews. Interviews were mostly initially data structures and algorithms heavy, and then there were 4 rounds of interviews. We had on data structures and algorithms strictly, and then the other one was low level system design, basically all your object oriented programming fundamentals. And then the other round, the third one was high level systems design. So everything from that aspect, how to design and develop distributed systems at scale, that aspect. And the fourth round was a fit round, plus also there was a problem to solve, which was again data structures and algorithms. So largely speaking, I'd say what Microsoft does look is, of course, your first impression would be your resume. So that has to really resonate with the kind of role that you're applying for. I wouldn't say that they're too strict about you must have worked with security or so and so, technology or so and so tech stack. So I don't think that's so much of a problem. But I think just being able to show that you've had experience where, you could handle solutions at scale, at least for experienced people, I think that would be important. And then throughout the interview process, I'd say it's important to know your fundamentals, at least at the software development engineering 2 level, and even for, a senior software developer level, I'd say. So when you move up, it gets more heavy on system design, I'd say. But then right at this mid-career and early senior level, I think it would be a mix of both data structures and system designs fundamentals. Yeah, so I think that is what they look for. And I mentioned that I would come back to referrals. So on that aspect, I'd say referrals only work if it is given by somebody on the hiring team. At least that's been my experience. So if you're referring someone for, a random team that you don't know about, but you're just referring them to kind of all the open opportunities, I haven't seen that work so much. So for one of my friends that I referred, it only worked out because it was largely under my organization that role was.
Yeah, and I think as well, like, you still need to get past that recruiter screen as well, which isn't a guarantee.
Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
of course. But even then, I'd say I have seen recruiters not even reach out. I'm not sure if it is just the sheer volume or what, but they might not reach out even with a referral if you are from the other team. And those chances just get like increased if, of course, you have a good resume, but if you're referred by somebody on the team itself. So, and
Yeah.
then, of course, the process would be the same.
Did you do anything specific to get your resume to the level that you mentioned about getting past the ATS screen? Was there anything that you did specifically to do that?
No, I think my resume is just like it just kind of entails all the work that I've done, but I make sure that, it's ATS friendly and that it is reflecting everything that I did do throughout my career.
But how did
Not so much as
you like know what was ATS friendly?
Yeah, so I think there are like just some, points that you should remember. One is not to make it too design heavy as much as people would want to. And you can get onto, those resume making apps. Some of them are free for 1 pages. And I'd say when you're in early career, don't make resume that is more than 1 page long. That's just how I feel. People might differ, but I don't think that your resume is supposed to be a whole novel of your career. It's just supposed to be quick insight of what kind of tech that you worked on and what kind of features that you've developed. And I think if you do it correctly, you can fit it into 1 page. itself. So those were some of the points. And then I don't go too long about one work experience. I make sure that it's just 3 bullet points, focusing on the tech stack, focusing on the feature and kind of system. And then you should have the keywords. So then again, the keywords would be the kind of tech stack that you worked with, the kind of systems that you're designing. So if you are doing, UX, you would write something like that, experience developer or user experience. If you do want to show skills, then you should have like a separate section where you highlight all of your main skills. If that includes a programming language, then so be it. And and then just let the resume breathe. I would say don't, make it too much. And I'd say that keep it just enough to build intrigue and at the same time kind of build your authority, that you know what you're talking about and you have worked on it. Doesn't have to be everything about you and your career, because that should be left for when you have a fit call or when the recruiter gets talking.
That's great, thank you. So we're coming to the end of our session now, and I'd just like to end with asking, what's next for you in your career?
Yeah, I think right now I would continue in the security side because I'm enjoying that. Other than that, I am creating content on LinkedIn, and that's mainly in the area of AI and LLMs and applied AI engineering. I would continue to do that. I do, have plans of expanding that into, a newsletter and, content that is more hands-on and ready for production level, insights. People who are looking to build systems which are leveraging LLMs and then being able to build real systems that can scale at production. So that's one of my inclinations. Yeah, so that's going to be what's next for me. And I think I might move into doing AI for my work as well. But let's see how that goes.
And how can people learn more about your work or connect with you?
So I'm currently on LinkedIn. That's the only platform I'm actively creating on. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and connect with me over there.
Great. I'll keep those links below so people can do that if they wish to. Thank you so much for being on my show. I've just got the quickfire questions round, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Great. So quickfire questions, answer as quickly as possible. Number one, favorite coding language?
C++.
Number two, tabs versus spaces.
Tabs.
Number three, Outlook or Gmail?
Gmail.
Ooh, don't let Microsoft know that. Number three, ChatGPT or Cloud?
ChatGPT.
And finally, what's your favorite IDE?
Visual Studio Code, or the Visual Studio, or the Visual Studio Code, whichever you can get your hands on. I like it.
Great.
So
thank you so much for...
At least Microsoft is happy over there.
Thank you so much for being on my show. It's been great to speak with you. And yeah, goodbye.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
Right,
yeah.
Thank you.